Hi folks, welcome to Walking on the Weene Side, part of It Matters Radio. And this evening we have a very special guest. He's from the other side of the world, although he grew up in the same town that I went to college in. Strange, small world kind of coincidence. But now Asher Yaron lives in Bali, in the Pacific Ocean, and he is a coffee nut, not a coffee bean, a coffee nut. He loves his coffee. And Asher, you just got a book coming out about coffee, and you're making a home roaster so people can roast their own coffee. And I don't know about anybody else, but that really excites me because I'm a coffee nut too.
So I can take you through a very brief history of how I started. I started in Southern Oregon, roasting my own coffee because I tried it once and I couldn't believe the difference. I developed a commercial coffee roaster idea in Southern Oregon, then moved to Bali, manufactured my commercial coffee roasters here in Bali, and opened up cafes here. And the cafes is called Freak, F-R-E-A-K, which is an acronym for Fresh Roasted, Enak, E-N-A-K is the Indonesian word for delicious, Arabica, I only use Arabica, from Kintamani. Kintamani is the local mountains here in Bali where the coffee is grown. So after Freak Cafe, I introduced my coffee to people, and I want to reach more people in their home because I wanted people to have this incredible coffee experience every morning when they wake up. And this is where I came up with the idea of creating a home roaster, which I have been working now for 4 years. And I've just launched a Kickstarter campaign about it. It's called the Power Roaster.
Mm-hmm. And folks, we're going to be showing you more about that. We're going to actually show you when in use a little bit. But before we do that, let's start with the more intellectual stuff, the book. What's the title of the book?
My title of my book is Coffee, the Fourth Wave, a Fresh Roasting Revolution. And I call it that because we're believed to be into the third wave of coffee. The first wave was making coffee commercially available to as many people as possible. It began in the mid-1800s and lasted until the mid-1900s. And this is coffee that's made by Maxwell House, Folgers, Hills Brothers. They packaged it, they ground it, and they got it to as many people as possible. Mm-hmm. The second wave of coffee was Starbucks. When Starbucks came on the scene, and Starbucks wanted to give the espresso experience to as many people as possible and focused on that. And then the third wave started in about 2000, the early 2000s, which was a specialty coffee wave. It was a little bit of an anti-Starbucks wave because it was a micro-roasting wave where they used lighter roasts, where it was more concerned about the origins, where the coffee beans were from. And now, taking this to the next level, I believe, is the fourth wave. It's when people really discover micro roasting, how important it is to fresh roast your coffee and use it, use a roast grind and brew a ritual every morning, similar to what they do in Ethiopia and what they've been doing for the last 1,000 plus years. Now, I'm taking that to the home.
Gotta interrupt there for one moment, because when we say the ritual, people immediately start thinking, hours and all kinds of preparation. It really is not that difficult a process.
Right, the whole process from start to finish, roast, grind, and brew, taking it from green coffee to the cup, is 10 to 15 minutes with my machinery.
So now, let me just mention here that you have a website where the people can go to so they can find, once the book comes out, which will be later this month, or maybe next month, they can order it, and it's also where they can find out more about the roaster, and they can find out more about the coffee that you're making available and all of that. So tell the folks now, and we'll remind them later, the name of your website.
So the website is named after our machine called the Power Roaster. So it's powerroaster.com, spelled exactly the way you would spell it.
Mm-hmm. Powerroaster.com. And now I understand that it's morning there in Bali, of course, and that you're ready for your first cup of coffee of the day, or maybe probably not your first. If you're like me, you're probably your second or third. But now, and you invited me to your house for coffee. Now,
Yeah,
and I'm all excited.
So actually, when you have coffee that's been freshly roasted, what people tell me from my own experience, you don't drink coffee all day long. You only have it in the morning, and it's enough. You don't need it all day long, because the effects of and the potency of the substances that are in this fresh roasted coffee are so powerful that they last for hours. I mean, it's really incredible. So actually, I only drink coffee in the morning. That's it. I don't drink it any other time. But we're going to show you the process I use every morning in how I roast, grind, and brew my coffee.
And just one other thing before we take a quick break, and then Asher comes back and we start roasting coffee. I do want to tell folks, because some of you might be saying, oh, well, high end, I forget it. This is something I can't do. Not quite. Actually, if you think about what you're spending, especially if you're stopping at a place like Starbucks and buying, God, that's awful expensive, that cup of coffee. And this is actually cheaper. It's cheaper than if you were buying regular Maxwell House or U-Bin or whatever and, perking it at home. This is still cheaper. So stick around and learn not only how to get yourself a good cup of coffee, but how to save money in the process. And with that, we'll be right back to watch Asher Yaron brew us some coffee. And unfortunately, we're only going to be able to drool at this end. And so, Asher, you're going to roast some coffee up for us, huh?
Yes, I'm going to demonstrate my home roaster here. Call it the Power Roaster.
Yeah.
And what it is essentially is the coffee is heated by hot air, and we roast that way. And we're able to roast 120 grams of coffee, about a quarter pound, in only 6 minutes. Really a very efficient machine. So I've weighed some green coffee here.
Right.
And this is what the green coffee looks like.
Yep. Now that coffee is grown. You're of course, in Indonesia. Is this coffee that's grown in Indonesia that you're?
Yes, it is. This is locally grown Kintamani 100% Arabica coffee, and I recommend for people to use only Arabica coffee because the other kind of coffee called Robusta, which is cheaper, which the big coffee companies use as filler in their coffee, that has twice the caffeine. And my experience says it's overload for the nervous system. Whereas Arabica has half the caffeine and other chemicals and elements which are much more beneficial to the human brain and body.
Okay, so you're going to pour it right into that little glass. It almost looks like a mug.
And this is a chaff catcher. So there's little skins or chaff that come off during the roast, and this catches it. So otherwise, it would be a mess in the kitchen.
Right.
Okay, we just put that on like that, and I set a timer, and all I do is turn the machine on.
Right.
And you can see it sounds a little bit like a hair dryer.
And basically, the hot air is moving the beans around a bit.
So the coffee is heavier right now because there's moisture in the coffee, and once those beans, that moisture evaporates, it becomes lighter. There's a lot more activity in the chamber. So you can see right now, it's not moving too much, but it's going to start moving more and more as the roasting process continues.
Now, this is the product that you're trying to create and to get a market for and get funding for. Is this roaster?
I'm sorry, I didn't get you. Can you say that again?
The product that your goal is to sell these roasters. Make and sell.
Yeah, so this is the roaster that I've developed. I've been developing for about 4 years now. And this is the product that I want to sell to people in their home because I strongly believe that everybody should be roasting their own coffee. Not only does it produce a much better coffee, fresher coffee, but also it's less expensive, so people can save money after just a couple months of using this.
And you forgot one other wonderful thing about roasting coffee. That roasting coffee has one of the best odors in the whole world.
Yes, exactly. And that's part of the whole process, and the whole beauty about the process is you get to experience the different aspects of coffee with your senses. So you get to smell the coffee, especially after fresh roasted coffee is ground. There's no smell like it on earth. It is really amazing. And also what you see is when you make the coffee is you see crema. You see this chemical activity if you're making a French press or other ways of brewing that you don't see with coffee you buy in the store.
Yeah,
because I consider the coffee in the store
that comes up,
dead, like not alive. Okay, so you can see now
the beans are beginning to move around a little bit. Now, you have this coffee that you're buying locally. Aaron? No questions. And Aaron back in a moment.
Sorry, Kenneth, I couldn't hear you over the noise of the machine.
You buy your green coffee locally. You buy the components that go into your roaster locally. Is that right?
Okay.
So, Aaron?
Yes, I hear you much better now. Go ahead.
Okay. You buy your coffee locally. You roast your coffee. You buy the components to build this mostly locally. You're using local labor. So you're a small business, a creative small business over there in Indonesia.
Correct, yes. I have had to source components for the roaster in different countries because Indonesia just doesn't have the technology for the internal part of the roaster.
Uh-huh.
But the base, the glass, the chaff catcher, all of these are made locally here in Indonesia. I build commercial coffee roasters as well, and the chaff catcher, for instance, is made out of metal, and that's done by a fabricator here in Indonesia who builds my commercial coffee roasters.
Uh-huh.
What I'm doing is I'm starting to shift my attention from commercial coffee roasters to home roasters.
Well, I think this is you might catch a wave here because, of course, people are more and more into brewing their coffee, grinding their coffee at home.
Yeah, and roasting now is the next step. So you can see the coffee's turning color. We're getting to be a nice brown color. It's also popping. I don't know if you can hear that cracking.
Yes, a little bit.
So that cracking is this is what happens to coffee. It's like making popcorn. It starts cracking when it reaches specific temperatures.
Right, so the beans are actually cracking.
That's correct. Yes, exactly. Exactly right. The first crack happens around 192 Celsius, and the second crack happens, I believe, at about 220 Celsius. How hot does it get?
Yeah, what's the hot temperature?
About 220. So right up the second crack is usually when we stop the roast.
Yeah. Is there a timer on it or some kind of thing, or do people have to learn from their own experience?
Yeah, there's no timer because everyone likes their coffee differently. Some like a lighter roast, some like a darker roast. So this gives the user the ability to stop the machine when it's ready. I mean, it only takes a few minutes. And now the nice thing about it is I can stop at any point during the process here, and we can check the color. You see that?
No, we can't. You're up below the. There. Okay, yeah, that's nice brown, but I don't think it's quite finished yet, is it?
Well, so you would have it done a little longer, I think, but to my liking, it is done.
And that's the difference between a dark roast and a light roast.
Yeah. It's just how much longer do you leave it in for a dark roast? And if you like a dark roast, which tends to be more bitter,
right,
than a light roast, which tends to be more sour, then you have that option. And that's the beauty of this. Everyone likes it differently. When you go into a coffee shop, you don't have that choice.
No, not usually. Once in a while, I find a coffee shop where they're really giving you wonderful options and differences. But most coffee shops, you're right, they're roasting it, grinding it, and making it. And you get to choose whether you want soy or whole milk or almond milk or something like that. And you feel like you're having a part of the process. But reality is this is where it really starts.
Yes, exactly. So really what I want to do is to give the consumer the choices here. And the choices now won't start at coffee with milk, coffee with sugar, coffee black. The choices will start as the origins. Where would you like your green beans from? Sumatra, Costa Rica, Ethiopia. You get to choose, and each of those origins have specific differences. Then you get to roast your own and choose. How do you like it roasted? Medium dark, do you like it dark? And you get to play around with those choices as well, because most people aren't used to, don't have the knowledge. I think what I always say is that roasting coffee brings you much closer to coffee, and you
Sure,
really start.
Hey, it's like the difference between buying canned tomatoes, fresh tomatoes. Hey, wait a minute! If I have my own little garden and I'm growing my own tomatoes,
It makes such a big difference. But the thing that's so important about coffee is the most used psychoactive drug on the planet.
yes.
And I really look at coffee that way, and I think it's very important to look at coffee that way.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something that affects our brains, our bodies, our consciousness. We are focusing mechanisms, and coffee has the ability to enhance how we focus. And it does that by stimulating receptors in the brain, I think, that makes it the brain think more clearly.
Yeah, actually, caffeine tends to be a dopaminergic substance. And we'll get right back, folks, but after this.
Even the best cooks have been known to claim they can't brew a good cup of coffee. But with a few simple guidelines, it's easy to make great-tasting coffee. And making homemade coffee is a real savings compared to buying it in a coffee shop. Regardless of the brewing method you choose, always start with freshly ground coffee beans. Coffee beans are roasted to various degrees of darkness. Choose darker beans for a stronger flavor, lighter beans for mild-tasting coffee, and create your own blend for something in between. Coffee grinders are inexpensive and well worth the investment. Since coffee beans lose their freshness quickly, it's best to grind them fresh each time you make coffee. The most popular methods for brewing coffee are the automatic drip, the manual drip, and the French press. Follow the manufacturer's guidelines for your coffee maker for either a fine or coarse grind. For an automatic drip coffee maker, measure the ground coffee into the filter, pour the water into the reservoir. Each 6-ounce cup of coffee, use 3/4 of a cup of fresh cold water and 1 to 2 tablespoons of ground coffee, depending on how strong you like your brew. And press the button to start the brewing process. To use a manual drip coffee maker, measure the coffee into the filter, bring fresh water to a full boil in a kettle, turn off the heat and allow it to rest for a moment. And then slowly pour the water over the coffee. Water just under boiling, at 195 to 205 degrees, releases coffee's compounds at their flavorful best. Be careful not to overfill the filter basket. Give it a stir to make sure all the grounds are submerged. You may need to wait for some of the coffee to drip into the carafe before continuing to pour the hot water. To make coffee using a French press coffee maker, measure the coffee into the carafe. Pour the tempered hot water into the carafe. Place the lid on the carafe and allow the liquid to brew for 4 minutes. Press the plunger to the bottom of the carafe to trap the grounds. Whether you like your coffee black or with milk, cream, or sugar, it all starts with the right brew.
So, welcome back, folks, to Walking on the Weene Side. Now, we've just been roasting some coffee with today's guest, Asher Yaron, who's all the way over there in Indonesia. And Asher, you got some beautifully roasted coffee there. What's your next step?
Okay, so the next step is we're going to take our fresh roasted coffee and we're going to grind it and brew it. And everyone has different ways in which they like to brew their coffee. There are many different ways, from espresso to a French press and everything in between. It just depends on how strong you like it. what your investment and equipment is. Espresso machines can be extremely expensive. I use something called a mocha pot. And a mocha pot is an Italian developed kind of a home espresso machine. I'll give you a view of what that looks like. And I'm sure your viewers are familiar with it too, because this is one of the most common ways.
Oh yes, yeah. That's. I've seen those all over the place. I've used them, I think, once or twice. It's not my preferred method, but it makes a great cup of coffee.
Yep, it's a strong cup of coffee. Right, true. So what I have here is a home grinder, and my grinder. It's Italian-made DeLonghi grinder, but the grinder you can pick up for about $50 US. Mm-hmm. And the nice thing about the home grinder, because this is called a burr grinder, what I suggest people avoid is using a blade grinder. This is a blade grinder. Mm-hmm. So the coffee here is put in, and it is just chopped up by this simple blade. Mm-hmm. And it does a much more inferior job than a burr grinder, which actually has gears that grind the coffee much more efficiently. Mm-hmm. And it's not that much more of an investment. So people can enhance their coffee experience significantly by buying a burr grinder, B-U-R-R. That's the type of the grinder, not the brand name. There's plenty of different brand names out there.
Now, to me, the difference is, I think when you're making food, and coffee certainly falls under food, even though you drink it. When you're making food, you want to treat the ingredients with respect and get the best flavor out. And I find that when you use a blade grinder, it kind of bruises the beans more instead of making them a nice smooth process.
It doesn't chop them up uniformly.
Yeah.
It chops them, and that's the most important thing you need to make a good brew. Is you need to have a grind that is consistent.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to grind these now. Mm-hmm. And take a few seconds. And I have this machine preset on the amount of coffee that I need for my mocha pot. So it'll stop automatically when it's around the proper amount.
So you don't grind it until you're really ready to use it.
That's right.
You can roast a day or two ahead.
You always want to grind it just before you use it. Otherwise, it oxidizes instantly.
Right.
And that's,
now, I have a question. Did you just grind the warm beans?
No. The beans, are still warm, cooling. I did a batch before, only about an hour before. That's what I ground.
Okay.
You only want to grind it once it reaches room temperature.
Because otherwise the oils are volatile, and the grinding just disperses them, and you lose them.
That's right. It's still processing. Okay, so I'm going to put some water in my mocha pot first.
Okay. Now, do you use just regular water that's available where you live, or are you filtering your water, or what do you do for the water? I guess Aaron's taking off his earphones for the moment, folks.
Yeah. Oh. Okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay. My question was, do you use regular water that's available to you, or do you filter your water, or what do you do?
I have bottled water. I use bottled water.
Okay.
So I wish you could smell this.
I was just saying to myself, I wish I could smell that.
The aroma is unlike anything else because the aroma of freshly roasted coffee has zero bitterness in it. Mm-hmm. It's nutty, it's sweet, it has the most flavors of actually more than wine. Actually, you know, coffee has, they say, 4 times as many different flavors as wine, which is interesting. So,
and by the way, folks, if you're a real coffee drinker like I am, and I think Asher is, yeah, when we're talking flavors, we're talking about the flavors in the coffee itself. We're not talking about those bottled syrups that have become so popular here in the States.
So with coffee, there's different florals, there's chocolate, there's cinnamon, there's all kinds of incredible things, including citrus. Because here in Bali, the coffee plantations are right next to citrus groves. So a lot of that citrus flavors come out in the coffee as well. Okay, so I just put it in the mocha pot here. I don't know if you can see. So so now what I'm going to do is go right away to my stove top, and I'll put the mocha pot.
Notice it's a gas stove, folks. I personally, I think gas stoves are better for brewing coffee.
I think better than electric.
Because the heat goes all the way around the bottom.
That's right.
And really warms it up that way.
Yeah, so I like to leave the top open because I like to see the crema that forms inside once we start brewing here.
So what temperature do you try and get your water up to?
So the way it works in the mocha pot is the water in the bottom of the mocha pot is boiling. That boiling water is forced through the grounds, and then it ends up in the reservoir above the boiling water, right? So that means the water has to get to 100 centigrade in order to boil. Right. That's the boiling point of water, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Now that's one of my problems with most coffee making processes. I like my coffee to be my water to be a little under boiling. And the way I do that is I use what's called an AeroPress. I don't know if you're familiar with an AeroPress,
absolutely.
But I love them. It's kind of like a French press, but individualized.
Right. It makes a much stronger cup of coffee.
Right.
Yeah. Very, very popular, the AeroPress.
Yeah.
I would agree. Although you wouldn't be able to use that in the mocha pot because that forced pressure of that boiling water is what ends up brewing the coffee. But if you're doing like a French press, you could take the water right off the boil. So it could be a little bit lower than the boiling point and then pour it, or a pour over. If you're doing something called a pour over, you would do the same kind of method. Yeah, absolutely. And espresso machines, they're putting boiling water through a compact pressurized system and extracting the most intense form of coffee. That's why espresso machines are so costly. But they also do an incredible job, especially with fresh roasted coffee, because the chemicals that are coming out are the most intense. I'm not talking about just caffeine here.
No.
There's 1,000 different chemicals that are created during the roasting process. And a lot of these chemicals start deteriorating immediately after roasting, which is why I want to capture these chemicals and use coffee that has just been roasted. Yeah. And by using the roast, grind, and brew method, this is the same method that they've been doing in Ethiopia for over 1,000 years. It's called the Ethiopian coffee ceremony. So all I'm doing is duplicating this ceremony that makes the most amazing coffee. And if you ever talk to anybody who's been through an Ethiopian coffee ceremony, they'll tell you how great that coffee is.
Every now and then you find a place that will do it in the States. Like we have one here in Phoenix. I don't know if this done, but they were doing the coffee ceremony. And I did go, and oh my God, so much better cup of coffee.
That's right. So all we're doing here is duplicating that process of roast, grind, brew, no time in between. But we're doing it with higher tech, better equipment. So the process takes minutes rather than hours like the Ethiopian coffee process takes. You know, that's one of the drawbacks. So my whole thing, once I started using coffee that was just been roasted, is how do we take this process, this ceremony that is so sacred and delivers the most incredible cup of coffee, how do we bring that to the masses? And that's what I'm trying to do here. So we're getting...
Now, when people...
You see that?
Yeah. When people start using your roaster, are you going to be providing them with coffee, or are they going
Yes.
to... Yes, so you're going to be... And are you going to be selling grinders, or is that, and pots, or is that all up to them?
No, absolutely. So we're going to start with green coffee, so they can roast their green coffee. But I definitely want to get into making grinders and brewers, because there's a lot of stuff out there on the market that uses a lot of technology that is not helpful at all.
Right.
And I feel that it becomes overpriced. So really what I want to do is make this whole process as affordable as possible to as many people as possible.
And, folks, when you're thinking, oh, gosh, this is going to be a lot of money, and, I can just go down and buy a Silex coffee pot and then go to the supermarket and buy my coffee. Reality is that by the time you've had your coffee in the morning and you've paid to the marketing and the roasting and the shipping and everything that's going into that supermarket coffee, you could save yourselves enough money to pay for all of this equipment pretty quickly.
Yes, it's actually very very affordable. And if someone buys my roaster and green beans, in 2 months the roaster will have paid for itself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it economically it makes complete sense.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm trying to do is, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I think the big coffee companies have big businesses that rely on this misinformation. For instance, capsule coffee. Capsule coffee, where you see George Clooney, who's advertising for coffee in these capsules, and you put it in their special machine, and now comes this spectacular, espresso or whatever. That's like instant coffee. Mm-hmm. Capsule coffee is today's the way instant coffee was 40 years ago.
Yep.
It's made for convenience and marketing, and it's not good coffee. The coffee has
what it is it's taste kind of played with. It does. They're putting chemicals and flavorings in, yes. So you think you're getting a cup of coffee.
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just finishing making my coffee for myself, and
how do you take it?
Actually, I like it with palm sugar and just a little bit of milk, and I only use the milk really to change the color from black to that like a dark brown, because I really like the color of the dark brown.
Uh-huh.
If I'm at one of my cafes in Ubud, we do coconut milk, freshly made coconut milk, and that to me is the best. The problem with the coconut milk is it doesn't last. So if you make it for the day, at the end of the day, you're throwing out anything you have left over, because it goes bad very fast. But I really strongly believe that everybody should have coffee the way they like it. We all have different tastes. Some can't get past the bitterness. Some, it's way too sweet. They like that bitterness and the other flavors. Everyone's different. So I really believe that we should, I like to say, have it your way. I really believe coffee should be had your way. And if you're roasting it yourself, then you really get to have it your way, because you're determining the level of the roast. How do you like it?
Mm-hmm. And the freshness, which is so important. Well, while you're getting your sugar and milk, we're going to take a brief pause. And meditation on a new coffee pot. It has, I know, begun to rain. Big drops that splat on window panes and run the glass course as they want, in merry race until they splash from the sill into the ground. while on the kitchen stove I hear the plop and drip of my new pot, a coffee pot with smells so rich to fill my nose and warm my heart with memories of golden time when hours crept and minutes stopped despite the ticking of the clock. I pour the liquid Eucharist, remembering the touch of love, remembering the sweetest kiss. Nut brown she walked as if on air, her head held high with frizzed black hair, defying discipline as she moved through the door, across the room. With arched back and swaggered step, she challenged me to not react. I failed her defiant test, reached out with moaning crave and sought her lips, bite her pink, smooth tongue in one brief eternity embrace. It has, I know, begun to rain, swollen, plunging tears, unrestrained, trace the lines worn in my face, and slowly join, drop by drop, with the coffee.